Hello, grade 10s. Your favorite tutor is back, and I go by the name of Miss Noktula Zulu. So today we will be looking at our practice and applications questions under the topic that says private and public sectors. Without wasting your time, let us just go straight into it. Our first practice question says, classify the following businesses into formal and informal sectors. Indicate with a cross next to the relevant answer. We'll start with our spaza shop in a township. Before we even answer that, let us just recap. We said that informal sector are businesses that are not registered with the CIPC, are businesses that are not registered to pay tax. While in the formal sector, these businesses, they pay tax, they are registered with the CIPC. So a spaza shop in a township, would it fall under formal sector or informal sector? So the correct answer there would be an informal sector.
Then here we have a bed and breakfast, and a bed and breakfast falls under the formal sector.
Then we have our municipality providing refuse removal services. Does our municipality fall under the formal sector or informal sector? It falls under the formal sector. Then we have Anglo Gold. Anglo Gold, it's a mine. Does it fall under the formal sector or informal sector? It falls under the formal sector. Then we have our ECD, our Early Childhood Development Center. Does it fall under formal sector or informal sector? It falls both under formal sector and informal sector, because you'd find that there are some ECD centers that are registered to render the services of taking care of the babies while the parents are at work. And you'd also find that there are also early childhood development centers whereby they are not registered. It's just an agreement between a parent and the childminder who's going to take care of the child, and it's not even registered. Hence, we are saying it falls under both the formal and the informal sector. Those which are registered fall under the formal sector. Those which are not registered, they fall under the informal sector. Hence, we have crossed under the two sectors. Then let's move on to the next question. Distinguish between the formal and informal sector. So the term distinguish, it says differentiate. Now we need to differentiate between the two sectors. What is the difference? Okay. Employees work specific working hours under the formal sector. So under the formal sector, we know that employees are protected by certain legislations because those businesses are registered. So there's certain legislation that businesses have to comply with. So their workers are working specific hours that are stipulated in their contracts. And on the other hand, in informal sectors, employees work long hours because there's no contract there. Even if there is contract, there is no legislation that is binding the employer because businesses under the informal sector are not registered. So that's the difference between the two sectors. Another difference is that income is regular weekly or monthly earnings under the formal sector. On the other hand, under the informal sector, income earned is irregular and inconsistent. So under the formal sector, because there's an agreement that has binded the two parties, which is the employer and the employee, as well as the legislation that the employer has to comply with. So it depends on the agreement, the contractual agreement that is written, which is binding both the employer and employee, that a payment should be made weekly or a payment should be made on a monthly basis. So that payment is consistent. Surely if it's monthly, you get your salary on a monthly basis if you work under the formal sector. But if you work under the informal sector, because sometimes the contract is verbally and there's no legislation that the employer has to comply with. Hence, you find the payment to the employees is irregular. It's not even consistent. You may find that this month you are getting paid maybe on the 5th. Next month you are getting paid on the 15th of the month. So it's just inconsistent because they are not registered, those businesses. So they know very well that they can exploit people since they have nowhere to complain to, and there's no law or legislation that is binding their employer. Businesses pay tax to SARS on turnover and profits made to the business. So under the formal sector, we need to understand that these businesses, since they are registered with SARS, they pay tax based on their revenue, on their amount of money that they get on annual basis. So they are being taxed on that revenue, even on the profits that the business is making. Why? Because they are registered with the South African Revenue Services. But when it comes to informal sector, businesses do not pay tax on the profits of the business. So since these businesses under the informal sector are not registered, so they do not pay any tax to the South African Revenue Services. So all the profits, they belong to the owners because they are not registered. Now, the third question says, elaborate on the meaning of the public and private sector. We'll start with the public sector. The public sector comprises of various business enterprises owned and managed by the government. So when we talk of the public sector, we are referring to all the enterprises that are owned and controlled by the government. The government is the owner of these enterprises. It can be through majority, being the majority shareholder in these entities. So businesses that you find under the public sector, they are controlled, they are managed by the government. It is composed of all levels of government and government-controlled enterprises, also known as state-owned companies or enterprises or SOEs. So basically, if you see businesses that ends with SOC or SOE, meaning state-owned entities or state-owned companies, then what would click in mind is that that particular business is owned and managed by the government. So those are the businesses that are controlled, that are managed by the government. The meaning of the private sector. The private sector consists of business activities that is owned, financed, and run by private individuals. So in the private sector, it's different. Now the government is not involved, but it's only owned and managed by private individuals. There are people who own these businesses, not specifically the government, but private individuals. Businesses in the private sector are privately owned by sole traders, partnerships, closed corporations, profit companies, and their main aim is to make a profit. So the businesses that you would find in the private sector, since they are owned and managed by private individuals, it can be a sole trader. Under the sole trader, it's only one person who owns the business, and that one person is not the government. You can find partnerships which are owned by private owners, so they fall under the private sectors. And one thing that you need to understand is that under the private sector, these businesses, their main aim is to ensure that they make a profit. That's why they started these businesses. Then we have some of these businesses exist in the formal or informal sectors. So you may find some of the businesses that fall under the private sector. They are also found in the formal sector, whereby businesses are registered, they pay tax. You may also find them under the informal sectors, whereby businesses, yes, are owned and managed by private individuals, but they are not registered, they do not pay tax, but still they fall under the private sector because they are privately owned by individuals with the main aim of making a profit at the end. Let us go for a quick ad break and I will see you shortly.